How does a girl simply vanish between her house and a carnival less than a mile away? How does a town forget? When the laughter never really left, only changed its tone. Everyone in Ashford remembers the night the Sunlight Carnival came, but no one agrees on what really happened to Lily Harper. It was April 1978. A spring too warm, too bright for a town that small. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where secrets hid behind white fences and church bells. The air smelled like wet asphalt and lilac. Puddles shimmered beneath flickering neon signs. Fresh posters covered the brick walls of Main Street. Sunlight Carnival. 1 week only. Fire eaters. Tightrope dancers. Exotic animals. A show you'll never forget. No one knew how true those words would be. Lily Harper was 19, a student at Ashford Community College. She wanted to become a teacher, the kind children would remember for her kindness, not her lessons. She kept a little leather diary, brown and worn from use. Her final entry, dated April 12th, read, "I want to teach children to be kind, even when the world isn't." By that evening, the world had proven her right. She left home at 6:45 p.m. wearing the sky blue dress she had sewn herself. "I'll be back before 11, she told her mother. She never came back. The park was only a 15-minute walk away. The path took her past the church, across the railroad crossing, and through a narrow stretch of trees. Neighbors remembered seeing her, smiling, waving, her ticket folded carefully in one hand. Then, nothing. At 7, her friends waited at the carnival gate. By 8, they were searching through the crowd, calling her name. The band played louder, drowning out their voices. The smell of popcorn and oil filled the air. Children laughed under strings of yellow bulbs. Inside the big top, the ringmaster cracked his whip and bowed. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills. At 9:10 p.m., it started to rain. Denise called Lily's house from the payphone by the diner. Her mother's voice trembled through the static. She left hours ago. She should be there. She wasn't. The carnival lights flickered as the storm thickened. A clown hurried across the lot, dragging a bucket of water. Somewhere in the shadows, a metal latch slammed shut. Quick, sharp, final. By midnight, the music had stopped. The Ferris wheel stood still, dripping in the rain. The red and yellow tent glowed faintly, like a wound that refused to close. The next morning, the people of Ashford woke to silence. No laughter, no music, just the echo of something they didn't want to name. And though the carnival left 3 days later, some said its smell lingered. Wet sawdust, gasoline, and something faintly metallic. For years, the question haunted Ashford. What really happened to Lily Harper that night? And who among them already knew? The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the forest washed clean and eerily still. Mist clung to the pines outside Ashford like smoke from a fire no one remembered lighting. Around 7 a.m., a farmer named Harold Mendez was cutting across the old service road to check his cattle fence when he saw something pale among the ferns. At first, he thought it was a mannequin. Carnivals left trash, props, even old posters in the woods all the time. But when he stepped closer, the smell hit him. Copper, damp earth, and something he couldn't name. He ran all the way back to the nearest farmhouse, mud up to his knees, screaming for someone to call the police. By 8:30, the forest was sealed off. The scene was strange. Too quiet, too clean, one officer later said. The ground was wet, but there were no footprints except the farmers. Birds didn't sing. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Detective Thomas Samuels arrived shortly after 9. He stepped out of his unmarked sedan in a worn trench coat and looked at the line of trees like he'd seen them before, in another country under another kind of war. Vietnam had left him methodical, detached. He'd seen bodies before, but not like this. The girl lay in a shallow patch of clearing, her blue dress torn, her skin almost luminous in the morning light. What was left of her face still looked young. Her purse was nearby. Inside, a student ID, a few coins, and a folded ticket stub from the Sunlight Carnival. "Jesus," one rookie muttered. Samuels didn't answer. He just knelt down, studying the details, how the soil had been disturbed, how the branches above were snapped but not torn. Everything about the place felt deliberate, arranged. The coroner whispered something to him, low enough that only the detective heard. Samuel's jaw tightened. Later, the report would describe multiple knife wounds and post-mortem removal of soft tissue. The word cannibalism wouldn't appear in print, but it was on everyone's lips before sunset. By noon, the small police station in Ashford was swarming. Reporters from Salem and Eugene showed up before the forensics team finished packing up. Sheriff's deputies tried to keep them out, but rumors moved faster than authority ever could. People whispered that Lily had been mutilated, that something had been taken. At the Harper house, the blinds were drawn. Lily's mother sat at the kitchen table, holding the phone in both hands long after the call had ended. Her husband, John, stood by the window, staring out at nothing. "She was supposed to come home," he kept saying. "She was supposed to come home." Detective Samuels visited them that evening. The house smelled of rain and coffee gone cold. On the counter lay a pie someone from church had dropped off, untouched. He explained what they knew, which was almost nothing, and what they feared, which was much worse. Outside, the sirens wailed again. Another search team heading back to the forest. Dogs barked in the distance, restless, confused. That night, the local paper printed a single headline across the front page. "Young woman found dead in woods. Foul play suspected." But in the bars and kitchens of Ashford, the story grew teeth. Some said it was a drifter, others a soldier who'd gone mad. A few whispered the word ritual. And always, beneath every theory, one name kept surfacing: the Sunlight Carnival, still camped just outside town. Detective Samuels drove past the tents after midnight. The rides were dark, the Ferris wheel motionless against the fog. But he could see shadows moving behind the striped canvas, slow and deliberate, as if someone was cleaning up after the show. He parked his car, engine running, and watched. Somewhere inside, a lion gave a low, uneasy growl. A man's voice hushed it, calm, almost tender. Samuels gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He'd been to war. He'd seen what people could do to one another. But what waited behind those red and yellow walls felt worse. Older, quieter, and infinitely more patient. The next morning, the carnival grounds looked almost cheerful again. Bright pennants flapped in the breeze, and the air smelled of sawdust and grease. But behind the smiles, every performer knew the police were coming. By 9 a.m., sheriff's cruisers and Detective Samuel's unmarked sedan rolled through the gates. Officers spread out across the muddy field, through the animal pens, the trailers, the faded striped tents. They carried notebooks and wore expressions that didn't match the music still playing faintly from the calliope. "Keep your distance from the cages," one deputy warned, as a lion paced back and forth, tail flicking. The carnival's owner, George Atwood, a stout man with silver hair and a sunburned neck, walked toward them, wiping his hands on a red kerchief. "You've got it all wrong, detective," he said quickly. Before Samuels could even introduce himself, "We run a family show. Kids, laughter, popcorn, that's all. Whatever happened out there in those woods, it had nothing to do with us." Samuels looked past him toward the animal tents. "Your people were the last outsiders here before the body was found. Atwood sighed, his eyes darting toward the performers who were pretending not to listen. You think I'd risk my whole business? We've been on the road 20 years. We've seen trouble, sure, but never like this. Inside the performers' area, the smell of hay mixed with the heavy scent of raw meat. In one corner stood Eli Graves, the lion trainer. He was tall, lean, with hair so light it almost looked white under the sun. He moved quietly, methodically, as he cleaned the bars of a steel cage. His eyes, when they met Samuel's, were gray, the kind of gray that reflects nothing. You work the animals? The detective asked. Yes, sir. Eli's voice was low, smooth, almost polite. They listen better than people do. You were here last night? Of course. The lions don't feed themselves. Samuels glanced at the scar on the man's wrist. Deep, old, and strangely circular. Hear or see anything unusual? Eli paused, then smiled faintly. Detective, everything in a carnival is unusual. A few feet away, clowns smoked in silence, their painted smiles half-washed by rain. The strong man pretended to fix a wagon wheel but kept glancing toward the police line. Every sound, the creak of metal, the thud of boots, seemed louder than it should have been. By noon, the search was over. No weapon, no trace of Lily, just muddy prints, animal tracks, and the lingering stench of blood that seemed to drift even where it shouldn't. Atwood signed the report with a trembling hand. We've got a schedule, he said. Next stop's Eugene. The show must go on, you know? Samuels studied him for a long moment. For your sake, Mr. Atwood, I hope it can. That evening, as the sky turned the color of rust, the carnival began to pack up. Trucks rumbled down the dirt road, headlights cutting through the mist. The Ferris wheel came down piece by piece, the laughter recorded on the speakers still echoing through the empty lot. Detective Samuels stood beside his car, watching the last trailer disappear around the bend, the one with the faded lion painted on its side. A single curtain fluttered in its small rear window. He lit a cigarette, though he'd promised his wife he'd quit. The smoke rose into the gray air, mingling with the dust and diesel fumes, and for a long while he just stood there, listening to the silence that followed the circus out of town. Something about that silence felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean. The funeral took place under a gray sky that refused to open. Ashford's small cemetery stood at the edge of town, overlooking the river where fog rolled like slow breath. The church bell tolled 3 times, too soft for the kind of grief that had gathered there. Lily's coffin was closed. Her mother couldn't bear to see what the forest had left behind. People brought flowers, mostly white lilies, their petals already bruised by the drizzle. The high school choir sang off-key. Someone whispered prayers that faded before they reached the clouds. Detective Thomas Samuels stood apart from the crowd, hat in his hands. He didn't know what to say to the family. There were no words that fit. When Mrs. Harper finally approached him, her face hollow from sleepless nights, she didn't cry. She only asked one question. Will you find who did this? I will, Thomas said quietly. I promise you. He meant it then. But promises are easy in spring. Weeks turned into months. Leads dried up. The forensics team could offer only photographs, measurements, and theories. DNA testing was still science fiction. Fingerprints incomplete, communication between departments slow as mail. Every report ended with the same line. No new evidence obtained. By July, the Sunlight Carnival had long moved on. First to Eugene, then north to Washington. In every new town, posters went up, laughter followed. And when the tents came down, rumors lingered like ghosts. In August, a deputy in Spokane called Samuels about a new case. A young woman found in a wooded area behind a fairground. Same mutilations, Same eerie cleanliness of the scene. But before Samuels could travel there, jurisdictional red tape shut him down. Different state, different rules. He filed a report anyway and clipped the article into a folder labeled Harper/Carnival Lead. By the end of the year, there were 3 more deaths, each connected by the same pattern, though no one dared to link them officially. The FBI had bigger monsters to chase. Ashford was too small, too quiet, and so the case began to fade, like old photographs left in the sun. At home, Thomas's wife stopped asking when he'd come to bed. The smell of whiskey followed him everywhere, into the kitchen, the porch, the station. His daughter, Claire, barely saw him. On some nights he would drive out to the edge of town, park near the empty field where the carnival had stood, and just sit there with the headlights off, staring into the dark. He started keeping notebooks, filled with sketches of the tents, maps of circus routes, lists of names. He called other departments, trying to connect dots no one wanted to see. The same phrase appeared over and over in his notes. He's still moving. When the chief finally ordered him to take time off, Thomas didn't argue. He walked out of the station, hat low, coat collar up, the rain starting again. The case that had once united the town now isolated him completely. By the next spring, Lily's grave was just another patch of grass. The flowers had wilted. The stone had begun to stain from the weather. But Thomas still came every Sunday, standing there in silence, sometimes talking under his breath as if she could hear him. "Not yet," he'd whisper. "I haven't forgotten." And somewhere far away, another tent was being raised, red and yellow stripes catching the same gray light, while laughter echoed faintly through another small town that hadn't yet learned how quickly joy can rot. 10 years passed, but in Ashford, time seemed frozen. The case files yellowed, evidence boxes gathered dust, and no one spoke Lily Harper's name anymore, except Detective Thomas Samuels. He was no longer a detective now. After 2 nervous breakdowns and 1 suspension for obsessive conduct, the department quietly pushed him into early retirement. His badge sat locked in a drawer he never opened. At home, the walls of his study had become a shrine or a grave. Maps with red threads, newspaper clippings from Oregon, Washington, Idaho, faces of girls and boys who'd gone missing near traveling carnivals. Each photo pinned beneath one word: possible. Above his desk hung a faded poster of Sunlight Carnival, its colors nearly gone. Across it, scrawled in thick black marker, "Find him." Thomas spent his nights hunched over a notebook, hands shaking from too much whiskey and too little sleep. He tracked routes, dates, lunar cycles, anything that might form a pattern. His wife stopped trying to pull him out of it. His daughter, Claire, only watched from the doorway, too afraid to speak. She was a child when Lily vanished, but she remembered her father before the case. Calm, patient, kind. By the late 80s, he was a ghost that haunted their kitchen, muttering to himself, chain-smoking while the TV played static. Every few months, another clipping arrived by mail, another unsolved body found near a fairground. Each one reopened the wound. "Same marks," he'd whisper. "Same silence." By 1992, his wife was gone. Claire was grown, studying criminal justice in Portland, trying to understand what had broken him so completely. In 1995, Thomas Samuels died in his sleep. On his desk, police found an open journal. The last page read, "He's still out there. He never stopped. Someone has to finish this." Claire kept that notebook. She didn't know it yet, but the hunt that destroyed her father was waiting for her to begin it again. By 2012, Claire Samuels wore the same kind of badge that had once ruined her father. She worked homicide in Portland. Long hours, cold coffee, and the quiet company of old ghosts. When her mother passed, Claire inherited the house in Ashford. Sorting through the attic, she found a battered cardboard box labeled Carnival. Inside, yellowed notebooks, photos, maps dotted with red ink. Her father's handwriting filled every page. Dates, routes, newspaper headlines, and scrawled notes that looked half mad, half brilliant. He hadn't been guessing. He'd been tracking. Claire spread everything across the floor. The pattern was obvious now. Each murder, each missing person, lined up perfectly along the travel path of the Sunlight Carnival. Her father had seen it decades ago, but in the 70s there was no digital record, no national system to prove it. She decided to finish what he started. Using her department credentials, Claire accessed the National Crime Database. She fed in every name, every detail, every faded fingerprint still logged from the old Ashford file. The screen blinked, processed, then filled with matches, dozens of them. Different states, same weapon pattern, same injuries, same symbol carved behind the ribcage that no one had ever explained. And one name connected them all: Eli Graves. Lion trainer. Last known employment, Sunlight Carnival, 1978. Claire stared at the monitor, her heart pounding. Graves' records showed short stays under false names: Idaho, Montana, Nevada, then silence after 1991. No death certificate, no arrests, just disappearance. She knew reopening an archived case without approval was career suicide. But bureaucracy had buried the truth once. She wasn't going to let it happen again. That night, in her apartment, she pinned her father's old poster to the wall. The faded image of the carnival tent. The words "Find him" still scrawled across it. "All right, Dad," she whispered. "Let's see if he's still out there." The search for the past began in a dusty file room and ended in a retirement home 2 states away. Claire found George Atwood, the former director of the Sunlight Carnival, living in a small care facility outside Spokane. He was 87, frail, his hands trembling as he fed pieces of toast to a parakeet that perched on his shoulder. His mind, the nurses warned, came and went like weather. When she introduced herself as a detective from Portland, he froze, eyes narrowing with sudden clarity. "Portland?" he whispered. "Not Ashford." "No," Claire said carefully. "But I know about Ashford. About Lily Harper." Atwood's lips tightened. For a long time he said nothing, just stared at the rain sliding down the window. Then he murmured, "I knew he'd come back for me one day." "Who?" Claire asked. The old man gave a dry laugh. "You already know the name. Eli Graves, the Lion Man." He leaned back in his chair, breath wheezing. "You think he was just some drifter who liked killing?" "No, detective. Eli believed he was chosen. Said his bloodline came from old tribes in the Yukon. Shamans who could steal the years from others by consuming their hearts. He called it the ritual of life. Said the world forgot how to feed the soul properly." Claire's stomach turned. "You believed him?" "At first, no," Atwood admitted. "But people started vanishing. Town after town, same story. I should have stopped him, but he wasn't just a trainer, he was the show's star. The crowd loved him. The way he stood in that ring with those lions, it was hypnotic." He paused, eyes unfocused. After the girl in Oregon, everything changed. He got quieter, kept journals in a language no one could read. Sometimes he'd sit up all night talking to himself. Said the moon was calling him. Claire's hand tightened around her pen. "The moon?" "Full moon," Atwood said, nodding weakly. "Always the full moon. That's when he said the life force ripened. When he felt strongest." She flipped through her father's notes later that night in her motel room. Every date of every killing. And there it was. Each one fell within 24 hours of a full moon. He'd missed that connection by inches. When she returned to question Atwood again the next day, he was sitting alone in the courtyard, eyes half closed. She brought photos, old police prints from the 70s, mugshots, fair posters. His hand trembled as he touched one. "That's him," he whispered. "He hasn't aged a day, has he?" The photo was from 1978, but Atwood wasn't wrong. There was something timeless in the man's face, an unnatural calm. Before she left, he grabbed her wrist. His skin was papery, but his grip still had strength. "If you find him," he said, voice low, "don't go alone." 2 weeks later, Claire got a hit on a federal background sweep. A property deed from 1996 in the name of Elias Grayson, a known alias of Eli Graves. The address led to a remote mountain village in Northern California, population barely 200. No cell service, no police station, one road in and out. She printed the map, folded it twice, and stared at the red dot marking the end of the road. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "He's still moving." That night, under the light of another full moon, Claire packed a small bag, her badge, and her father's old revolver. The car engine rumbled in the silence as she whispered to herself, "Let's finish this." The road to Crescent Valley, California, twisted through pine forests and fog so thick it blurred the world into gray. Claire drove for 5 hours without music, guided only by the GPS arrow crawling across a blank screen. No reception, no signals, just the hum of tires and the slow heartbeat of her father's revolver in the glove compartment. The address led her to a narrow gravel path that ended before an old stone house half hidden by trees. Smoke rose from the chimney. The mailbox read E. Grayson. He hadn't even bothered to hide well. She parked, fixed her hair, and pulled a leather folder from the passenger seat. Inside was her cover, press ID, notebook, recorder. She took a breath, then walked up the porch steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Eli Graves stood there. Time had carved his face but not softened it. His hair, once pale blonde, had gone completely white, and his eyes, those same cold gray eyes, seemed untouched by age. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Journalist," he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Yes," Claire replied, smiling carefully. "I'm writing a book on traveling circuses of the 1970s. I was told you might have stories worth hearing." He studied her face, then nodded once. "People don't usually drive this far for old stories, but come in if you like." The interior smelled of cedar and dust. The walls were lined with faded posters. Sunlight Carnival, 1976. 1978. 1980. Lions roaring, acrobats mid-air, faces that no longer existed. Between them hung black and white photos, blurred, candid, too intimate. Claire's pulse quickened when she noticed a large wooden chest in the corner. It was locked with a heavy iron clasp, the kind used for animal cages. Scratches marred its surface, some deep, some new. "You kept a lot of memories," she said softly. Eli smiled faintly. "Memories are what keep us alive." They sat in the living room. A kettle hissed on the stove. He poured tea into mismatched cups. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. "So," he said, "you want to know what it was really like?" "I do," Claire answered, flipping open her notebook. "People still talk about the Sunlight Carnival, how it traveled from town to town, how it vanished after 91. Why did it end?" He sipped his tea. "Everything ends. The show, the laughter, the applause. What remains is hunger." "Hunger. For life," he said simply. "For youth. For the spark inside people. You see, youth is fire, and someone has to take it before it burns out." Claire forced a smile, her pen trembling in her hand. "That sounds poetic." "It's not poetry," he said quietly. It's nature. Lions, men, all the same. The strong take what the weak waste. For a moment, the only sound was the slow ticking of an old clock. Claire's throat felt dry. You ever miss the road? She asked. Eli leaned back, his eyes catching the light. The road never ends. It just circles back. He rose to refill her cup. When his back turned, she glanced again toward the chest. The air near it felt colder. She could almost smell metal and something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. Would you like to see my photographs? He asked suddenly. She froze. Of the circus? He smiled. Of what was left of it. Something in his tone made her heart stutter. Maybe next time, she said quickly, standing. You've already given me so much to think about. He walked her to the door, polite as ever. As she stepped out, he said softly, Miss Samuels. Her blood turned to ice. He was smiling, calm, almost kind. Tell your father I said hello. The door closed behind her. Claire made it to her car before realizing her hands were shaking too hard to fit the key into the ignition. She didn't drive away immediately. She just sat there, staring at the dark windows of the house, half expecting him to appear again. He didn't. Back at her motel, she filed for an emergency warrant request. It would take time, too much time. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was inside that locked chest, it wasn't memories. The warrant came through at dawn. Claire had barely slept, her mind looping through every word Eli had said. By 7, an unmarked SUV rolled up the mountain road carrying her and 2 federal agents. No lights, no sirens, just the dull hum of the engine and the steady weight of the pistols at their sides. When they reached the house, the forest was silent. No birds, no wind, only the sound of gravel under their boots. The front door was locked, curtains drawn. The agents broke it open in one clean motion. FBI, don't move. But there was no one inside. Only the faint smell of cedar and something older, metallic. The kettle on the stove was cold. They cleared the rooms quickly. Living room, kitchen, hallway, all empty. Then one agent called out from behind the pantry door. Detective Samuels, you should see this. A hidden stairway led down to the basement. The steps creaked under their weight, the air thick with dust and something sour, blood, maybe, or rust. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered to life, revealing what looked like a shrine. The walls were covered with photographs. Young men and women, their faces frozen mid-laughter. Each photo had a date scrawled beneath it in red ink, and strange symbols drawn in circles around the eyes. Claire's stomach clenched. Oh God! In the center of the room stood the wooden chest she had seen before. The lock had already been opened. Inside were dozens of small objects sealed in plastic bags. Pendants, watches, notebooks, hairpins, each tagged and labeled by hand. She reached for one and froze. It was a piece of worn paper, folded neatly. Her gloves trembled as she opened it. Handwriting. Faded, round letters. I want to teach children to be kind, even when the world isn't. Claire's breath caught. Lily Harper, she whispered. They collected everything, photos, evidence, artifacts, and waited outside for backup. The forest felt alive around them, watching. By evening, a local patrol spotted Eli Graves walking calmly down the highway 2 miles from his home. His hands were clean, his clothes spotless. When the officers ordered him to stop, he smiled and did as he was told. At the interrogation room in Sacramento, he sat straight-backed, unshackled, his gray eyes fixed on the one-way mirror. You've been carrying those things for over 40 years, Claire said quietly. You killed them, all of them. Eli tilted his head. Killed? He repeated softly. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He leaned closer, voice almost tender. You don't understand. They wanted me to continue the ritual. Without it, the fire dies. And when the fire dies, everything rots. For the first time in years, Claire felt real fear. Not for herself, but for what he might still believe. And as the door closed behind her, Eli's words followed, almost a whisper. The show never ends, detective. It only waits for the next full moon. Chat GPT może pomylatиться. Перевіряйте важливу інформацію. Дів параметри файл в cookie. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Reporters filled every seat, their cameras trained on the pale, unreadable face of Eli Graves. He no longer looked like a man, more like an echo wearing skin. When the judge asked for his plea, he smiled faintly and said, "Guilty," 27 times. There was no apology, no emotion, just that calm, hollow voice that made jurors shiver. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA matches, Lily Harper's diary, the souvenirs in the chest, and his own words recorded in interrogation. When the sentence came, life without parole, Eli didn't flinch. He only looked toward the window, as if waiting for the next full moon. Weeks later, Claire drove back to Ashford. The town had changed, but the air still carried something old, the kind of quiet that remembers too much. She parked near a small, peeling house on the edge of town. Inside, Margaret Harper, Lily's mother, sat in a rocking chair, her hair silver, her hands frail but steady. Claire knelt beside her and handed over a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "It's hers," she said softly. "We found it in his house." The woman unwrapped the diary, fingertips trembling over the faded pages. She read the last line aloud, barely a whisper. "I want to teach children to be kind, even when the world isn't." Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed calm. "Then she did," Margaret said. "She changed the world, didn't she?" Claire nodded. "Your daughter helped us close 27 cold cases. She gave peace to families who never had any." The old woman smiled faintly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Then she can rest now," she murmured. 3 months later, Margaret Harper passed away in her sleep. The following spring, Claire stood in the Ashford Cemetery. Before her, 3 headstones. Lily Harper, 1959 to 1978. John and Margaret Harper. And beside them, a modest marker for Detective Thomas Samuels. Wind rustled through the pines. The sky was pale, endless. Claire placed the diary on Lily's grave and whispered, "The shadow of the carnival is gone, but the light, that's us." In the years that followed, the Lily Harper case became the first officially solved cold case under the FBI's 2010 initiative. Training programs across the country used it as an example of persistence, data integration, and the enduring power of personal conviction. Eli Graves died in prison 2 years later. No one claimed his body. The Sunlight Carnival never returned, but its story did, retold in documentaries, lectures, and files labeled Tent of Shadows. For Claire Samuels, it was never about monsters or rituals. It was about silence, the kind that kills truth if no one listens. And in that silence, she had finally heard her father's voice. "Don't stop. Find him." Now she had